31-year-old man who admitted to killing victims in his apartment, then dismembering their bodies, may have murdered up to 17 people.
A serial killer is on the loose in the Daytona area.
Investigators are on the trail of a possible serial killer.
A stunning claim from an accused killer awaiting trial in Pennsylvania.
And authorities believe they could very well have a serial killer in custody.
And they say it may be the work of a serial killer.
An accused serial killer.
Welcome back to another 5 Minutes of Murder. Where on every bone-chilling episode, we take a closer look at one of the world's worst and most hated serial killers, just to see what makes them tick. I'm your host, Daddy Longlegs, and on tonight's episode, we take a closer look at William Heirens, a sexual predator and a murderer convicted of at least 3 murders. You, however, may know him better by his nickname, the Lipstick Killer, due to the horrifying messages he would leave scrawled all over the place in lipstick, and sometimes on his victims. Heirens was born on November 15, 1928 in Lincolnwood, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. His family was very poor, and his parents constantly fought and constantly argued. Heirens would then leave the house, wandering the house to avoid the conflict. He'd go to the streets. He would then turn to a life of crime in those streets, and he found stealing was very fun. He also found it very much a release and a sexual pleasure.
He would break into a home. He would steal certain items of clothing. He would get sexually excited during the course of doing that, and the behavior would then, of course, be repeated.
At the age of 13, Heirens was arrested for carrying a gun, which led to law enforcement searching his home. When they did, they found a hiding spot full of a number of things, from weapons, furs, suits, cameras, radios, and jewelry, all of which he had stolen. It was at this point that law enforcement decided to send him to the Gilbert School for Wayward Boys.
I started getting into trouble when I was about 13, and that was in burglarizing. I got arrested, and I was sent off to a boarding school for a year, and then when I came back, I got into the same trouble again.
Once he was an adult, he was released. It wouldn't take long for Heirens to go back to his old ways of burglary. But now it would change even further. It would change to murder.
It eventually got to the point where it turned into murder, and eventually into 2 murders of women, and then finally a murder of a young girl in her bed at home at night.
In June 1945, Josephina Ross, a 45-year-old woman, would be the first of Heirens' victims. But not only did he slit her throat, oh no, much more than that.
On a street called Kenmore, in a residential area, in an apartment. William Heirens broke into her apartment and committed a crime that would make a maggot nauseous.
Josephine Ross was murdered in her apartment, and I think it was around late in the morning.
He attacked her, he beat her, he eventually stabbed her to death. He then bathed her. He cleaned her body. He spent 2.5 hours in the apartment with her cadaver. He eventually taped the wounds closed and then left her building.
Ross's body was left in the apartment, where she was then discovered later on by her youngest daughter. 6 months later, Heirens' wheels would start spinning again, and he would repeat the cycle of murder. But at this time, it would become a little bit more sinister. Just a few weeks before Christmas, Heirens would stalk and kill Frances Brown, a 33-year-old woman living by herself. 2
weeks before Christmas, he committed a 1990s type of crime. He found a woman that was living alone, a 33-year-old woman by the name of Frances Brown. She was living on a street called Pine Grove in a residential area on the north side of Chicago. He broke into her apartment and he committed a crime that would give Stephen King nightmares. He found her alone. He beat her. He brought with him 2 weapons. He brought a knife and he brought a gun, and he used them both on her. The first weapon he used was the knife. He stabbed her in the throat. He stabbed her all the way through the throat in what veterans of the criminal justice system here call through and through. It went in this side of her neck and came out this side. He left it there. He also shot her in the head. After he had destroyed her life, he washed her body. He took her into the bathroom and he put her in the tub and he left her there, half in and half out.
The most disturbing part of this murder was the chilling note left behind by Heirens. He wrote it on the wall of Frances Brown's bedroom, and he wrote it in lipstick, almost begging law enforcement to catch him, as he was no longer able to control himself and he would no doubt murder again.
The thing about the Francine Brown murder that captured the city's attention is the lipstick writing on the wall of the bedroom where Francine Brown's body was found. The lipstick writing on the wall was, "For heaven's sakes, catch me before I kill again. I can't control myself." Those words were chilling to the public and captured the imagination of the newspaper reporters who made that a very sensational catchphrase.
In addition to this note, he also left behind one thing that would be his undoings, that of his fingerprint left on the door jamb. Unfortunately, that evidence would be found too late because on January 7th, 1946, Heirens would kill again, but this time even more sinister than the last. His victim would be that of a 6-year-old Susan Dion.
Went to a nearby basement, chopped her up. He cut her into 6 individual pieces. He decapitated her strawberry blonde head. He then took each of those pieces and put them in a separate location.
Even though Heirens had already murdered the 6-year-old, that wouldn't stop him from attempting to extort the family for cash. He demanded a $20,000 ransom from them, telling them that he'd get her back. He told them also not to contact the police or the FBI, which of course they did immediately. Now, once authorities were notified, a giant investigation of the area would begin, and they would soon discover the young girl's dismal fate.
Police came and then they searched the neighborhood and they looked in sewers and they found parts of her body.
He took the head and put it in the sewer.
It was at this point law enforcement was hot on the trail of a killer, but they needed more evidence. They needed a break, and they would soon get this break. Like most killers and like most criminals, Heirens was getting sloppy, and during a botched burglary after the murder, Heirens was arrested on June 26, 1946. Upon having him in custody, they fingerprinted him, and they would get a match. This is all they would need to connect all the dots.
His fingerprints were taken. They were sent to the Chicago Police Department Crime Lab, as well as to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Washington, D.C. Turned out to belong to William Heirens.
The handwriting on the lipstick message on the wall and the Dignan ransom note, they had their experts say that was mine.
Now faced with all this evidence put up against him, between the fingerprints matching at the crime scene and his handwriting matching both the wall letter and the letters left behind as far as the ransom letters, William Heirens would be now forced to give a full confession. He would even reenact the crimes in exchange for a deal with the DA, giving him only 3 consecutive life sentences as opposed to being sentenced to death by the electric chair. The electric chair was the preferred method at the time in Chicago for execution. It was there in prison that William Heirens would rot behind the bars. Sometime later, he would attempt to appeal this, but the case was basically thrown out. He said that the police coerced him into taking these charges, and that he was innocent of everything. These attempts to prove his innocence fell on deaf ears. March 5th, 2012, William Heirens died at the UIC Medical Center of Natural Causes of the ripe old age of 83, where he rotted in jail that whole time. Well, there you have it, kids, another monster of mankind. That's it for us on this episode of 5 Minutes of Murder. I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, kids, lock your doors and your windows, because you never know when your 5 minutes are going to be up. Peace.